Well, hi, everybody. It's the Week in the Tackle podcast, the podcast where we tackle the previous week from the world of football/soccer. I'm Tom Rennie. Alongside me for the program is MLS legend, star of Apple TV, and a man who pulls off a hat of someone in their 20s, though he's in his 40s. It is Mr. Brian Dunny Dunseth. How are you, mate? You all right?
I'm great. Here's a little insider tip for you, Tom Rennie.
Yes.
Because you do represent the Balds. I do not represent the Balds, although I'm getting closer. I'm on my way little by little. When I need a new fade, I end up wearing a hat. And I'm kind of the haircut is one of these haircuts that, like, if you don't like your beard and like from your sides to your beard, if it starts to not look, you got to get cleaned up. So if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right, I go with a little bit more of flat. This is one of those water resistant flats. So yeah.
For people that only see Dunny in hats, I was at the West Ham Chelsea game this weekend. You've got the same hair as Vladimir Soufal.
That is the meanest thing you've ever said to me. I hate you.
Just like, because from the front, you're like, oh, no, he's got loads of hair. He's fine. And then you sit above. I mean, it's unfortunate for him. You have to sit above Vlad. I was once on a plane with a man, I think he was from Fiji. The flight was from Fiji, so I assume so. And he didn't have any hair, but his hair was like thick black. And you were like, what is this? And it turned out he put like powder on the thin hair that he had. So when he got up, the chair was just covered in this black powder because that's something that the people do to cover up the baldness. So give that a whirl.
We hold on tight. Hold on tight. How are you? How's life? You good?
It's very good. Very good. I had a wonderful time at West Ham Chelsea this weekend, which maybe we'll get to on the program, probably more from a super funny Chelsea perspective. But it was great. I think it was you know what? It was just like the David Moyes teams the first 2.5 years he was there. It was when we started doing the Mosiah thing. It was whole like fight like the devil to get the points, which disappeared last year in the Premier League. It was there this year, even with old Shambler Tommy in midfield, left to right. He actually had some good moments in the game, Soucek, but also, gave a penalty away. So just someone get him a hot dinner and a holiday in the sun.
Get him some Gatorade. He looks exhausted. My man,
tired.
He literally, like, when the kickoff happens, he makes that first closing down run, and they like zoom in on him. And he's like he's just, it's like the 90th
just
minute.
For those that listen to the podcast there, Danny is making the exasperated face you make when you run a marathon, for example, whilst breathing heavily. If you saw it on YouTube, we can only apologize. But yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it immensely. And I was so enthused by it. I immediately went to the club shop and bought everyone the kit, which I don't even like. So there you go. But let's start with what's going on in the USA, because Messi Mania has reached its zenith. Victory in the first Leagues Cup goes the way of Inter Messi, which I assume they've changed their name to now. I mean, incredible, right? That Lionel Messi has come in and he's drawn so many eyes to the football world. And of course they went on to win it. I mean, right? They've got Lionel Messi.
Well, it really is incredible. Obviously, the individual within the collective is important, but we always talk about it being a team sport. But we're talking about the greatest footballer to ever live. I know the conversation includes Pele and Diego Maradona and obviously Cristiano Ronaldo. But when you just watch him, and there's so many things. Obviously, I'm a Messi fan, and I've made that clear. I just love the way he competes. I love his body language. I love the way he kind of just moseys around the field for the first 5 minutes, kind of just judging and figuring out the strengths and weaknesses, the setup, the tactical acumen of the opponent. And then he just starts to strike over and over and over again. The goal itself is incredible. I mean, even when he's not having a quote unquote major impact, there's still those moments that all of a sudden he pops up. His strength, his athleticism, his intelligence, his balance, all of those things, that left foot, it's just a wand of a left foot. But to see, for context, for those that don't understand what it looked like just about a month and a half ago, Inter Miami lost went winless in 11 consecutive games. 11 consecutive games. Phil Neville was fired. Tata Martino comes in. Obviously, Lionel Messi's announced, Sergi Busquets is announced, Jordi Alba's announced, and then you add 3 new U22 initiative players, and all of a sudden, it's a new lease on life for everybody. And it's almost like, we've talked about this before. There's moments where you as a player walk into an opponent's stadium, and you've already lost, You haven't even entered the field. You're in the tunnel, and you look over, and you're like, sorry, Tim. Like, see, I didn't do that right there. Came close. But you know that you could look at an individual, or you could look at multiple players, or you could just look at the jersey. You could hear the song. You could see the tiny bubbles floating from the sky. And all of a sudden, like you're at Chelsea this weekend, all of a sudden the game's lost before you even step on the field, like Chelsea this weekend. That's credit to you, Tom Rennie. But I just think what Lionel Messi has done has transformed Inter Miami and has created kind of this powerhouse mentality. And it's one thing to do well in Leagues Cup because it's inaugural season. No one really understood what it was going to look like, what it was going to feel like. Organically, I think it was a pretty incredible tournament to be pulled off in the manner in which it was, especially in the summer, especially because the two leagues took a break. But now there's how many people look at Inter Miami and say, I mean, dead last in the Eastern Conference, there's no way you're going to make the playoffs. After what we just saw in Leagues Cup, I don't see how you can bet against Inter Miami not methodically climbing that Eastern Conference table, because I just think simply with him on the field, all of a sudden, there's like this superpower Inter Miami has now, and then it's like kryptonite for every other team.
Well, let me ask you about that, Danny, because I think that's the interesting thing about what happens next with Lionel Messi, because when he came in, the time he came in, the Leagues Cup tournament, there's such a clear kind of end line. There's a clear goal. There's a clear trophy to be won. And, this is why the Leagues Cup, I think, actually has been a success and will continue to be a success, because there's this like, we're going to run to the end line. We're going to run to the trophy. This is the goal of it all. MLS ain't like that, as you know better than anyone from your time on every plane in the country. It's a slog, a monumental slog for everybody involved. How much do you think that Lionel Messi is going to be involved in the slog of it all? Is he going to be playing every single minute of every single game, which was possible during this very small tournament, as opposed to the second half of the domestic season, which, as you've already laid out, it's going to be difficult for Miami with or without him?
Yeah, when I saw this narrative pop up and I saw Tata Martino being asked about it, I was actually quite surprised. Right now, Lionel Messi, Inter Miami, 18 points. The playoff line is 32 points. So my maths aren't great, but a 14-point difference. And they've already played. And here's the interesting thing. They've only played 22 matches. Okay? 22 matches. DC United has played 25. Chicago Fire, Montreal, they've played 24. So you've got games in hand. So theoretically, we've got an extra 9 points. 9 points, theoretically, all of a sudden is a completely different conversation. 9 points right there takes them to 27. They're, 5 points out of a playoff spot with a ton of games remaining. So I don't even think this conversation about being out of the realm of possibility should exist, because it absolutely does exist, that they are going to be capable of climbing. Now, the Messi thing. What? Like, what? When has there ever been a suggestion over Lionel Messi's career that he needs to rest?
In that he hasn't run for like 5 years, so he does need to rest. He's not exactly a physical specimen that can go up and down for 90 minutes.
He doesn't do that. That's never been his game. It's never been his game. Pep Guardiola from the very beginning, Lionel Messi used to fly all over the field. If you go back the very first couple of seasons at Barcelona, like he was flying. Pep actually told him to slow it down. Like, no, I don't need you back pressing. I don't need you blowing out the gas. Like I just stay up high. Just find the game. I saw TikToks, I saw Instagrams, I saw whatever. I'm not calling it X. I saw Twitters. I saw, threads, all these different, like, here's a video of Lionel Messi walking. Great. That's what he does. He picks his spots. So this idea of like, we got to get him rest. I would put money down that Lionel Messi starts every single game for the rest of the season.
And finishes every single game?
Have you seen a game where Tata Martino, does anybody remember when Lionel Messi gets subbed off? He throws the toys. He's pissed. He doesn't want to come off the field. And I would suggest that the way this team has been built through Chris Henderson and now Tata Martino, you can hide him. It's not like you're asking him to sprint all over the field and track back into his own 18. So what would you take? Tom Rennie, would you take
this? He's furious at this.
No, it is
innocuous question
because it's so not you, but it's so stupid. This
is
question.
It though? I mean, it's hard. It's a hard. Like Paolo Di Canio never used to play above Watford.
If you have Lionel Messi on the field at any point, he individually gives you something that you could never replicate in the offensive phase of play. You can't. You can try to collectively try to replicate it, but what he can do, he is a unicorn.
Yeah, I mean, I get that he's the best player. I mean, you've not got to convince me of that.
Why would you take him off?
The question is, well, because he's the same age as me, and sometimes going up the stairs is very tiring. We will see.
We don't have any athleticism, though. That's the difference.
To be honest, that's absolutely true. But to be fair, neither does Lionel Messi. I just don't have the skill when walking as well. I want to move off MLS because I want to get to some other bits, but I will just mention hell is real, guys. Am I right? Am I right? Hey,
Columbus Crew smashed FC Cincinnati, and the tie-in here is that on Wednesday night, Inter Miami is at FC Cincinnati in the semifinals of the U.S. Open Cup. Real Salt Lake is on the road at Houston. Should Inter Miami win against Pat Noonan and Cincinnati in Cincinnati, which is one of the best stadiums, if not the best stadium in Major League Soccer, and Real Salt Lake and or Houston, whichever team wins there, they'll host a U.S. Open Cup final. So Real Salt Lake could potentially be hosting Lionel Messi and Inter Miami out here in Salt Lake City, which would be incredible because they're not on the schedule. And literally everybody's already texting me. And no, I do not have access or tickets.
Wait, whoa, surely for your week in the tackle, pals, you could hook us up.
I'll be there. No,
I'll
be
money.
There.
Surely you've earned enough money from all your flights and work for Apple over the last few months to get me and the horse out there for a nice couple of days.
I mean, I would bring you. I would not bring Horsey. Not after what happened in DC.
No, to be fair, he's an embarrassment to himself and others. And the other thing I'll just mention, thanks for that chat message. Sorry, Dunny, is what you should be saying.
Inappropriate, Tim.
Did you see that everyone now basically, when Inter Miami are coming to town, they're basically just saying, come and see Lionel Messi. I think I see something from the Revs talking about when they face each other at Gillette Stadium, whenever that is. And he was like,
I think it's next year. No.
Is it next year already? I didn't have the date on this thing, but it basically said, secure seats for the big game today, $27, and come and see Lionel Messi star for the League's Cup winners. And it made me think of the time where Man City just got a first flush of money. And West Ham were diabolical. So I think would have been like Gianfranco Zola time, dark days, Uncle Avram in charge. And on the big screen at the Boleyn, they put, come and see Man City stars take on West Ham. And it was like, you fundamentally misunderstood the crowd here. Like, maybe now at the kind of the bowl, you'd be like, yeah, okay, you're going to get 10,000 tourists, so fine. But not in the stadium to the hardcore support who have been grandfathered in. No one's coming to see Man City's stars rip West Ham a new asshole.
Yeah.
So why are you promoting this? Sure, you should be saying, please come to this. We're sorry, please. That's what they should be doing.
Well, it's funny because out here in the States, there's been, I wouldn't say quite significant, but there's definitely been a conversation about how Leagues Cup is a different animal than MLS, right? Leagues Cup and the running of the tournament, and you've got the splits and cash and who gets what, and so it's a little bit different. So ultimately, who's setting the prices? MLS, now you're going to have teams setting the prices. So the idea of like locking in and getting your ticket, like Gillette Stadium with Lionel Messi is going to see a lot of people. I don't know if it's going to be sold out, but it's going to see a lot of people. So $27 is nothing. That's cheap. I mean, some of these tickets, the Nashville supporters that were being priced out, I mean, the tickets were running $350, $450, kind of in that range. But listen, this is like going to Disneyland. Like you're going to spend money. So like you can justify, it's Lionel Messi, I'm going to spend money. But it almost feels like you're starting to get to that phase where it's not like, hey, Lionel Messi's coming next year. It's almost like, did you see Lionel Messi score 9 goals in the League Cup? Well, come on over and watch him score goals against New England Revolution starting next season for only $27. It's like,
it
wait,
would
what?
Massively grate me if I was a Revs fan, but But there we are. It's the world we live in, I suppose. Bum's got to go on seats. Listen, we've got to move on because I want to talk about Chelsea a little bit. And I've been to both Chelsea games this season, the Liverpool game on the opening day, the draw and the loss against the Hammy Hams on Sunday. Before we get into it, and I have a lot to say on Chelsea, I just wonder whether you might want to do a retraction. I don't know if you want to do this or not. We did post last week on the Week in the Tackle Instagram and our Twitter page, whatever it's called now. Brian Dunseth last week said Chelsea should challenge for the Premier League title. Would you like to retract that, or would you like to double down? Where would you like to?
No. So I think what is being misconstrued in this conversation, and I'm not trying to protect myself, I would just like to clarify, because you absolutely wound people up on the old X machine over there, even though you type in twitter.com and it takes you to x.com. Yeah.
So stupid. So dumb.
So stupid.
So dumb.
But I saw what you did. Somebody sent it to me. And you were implying that I was saying that Chelsea's team right now is built to win the Premier League. That's not what I was suggesting. What I was suggesting was, with the amount of net spend, and I don't care about justifying what the outgoing player prices are. I don't care about amortization. I don't care about any of that. I just care about the quality of the amount of signings with the amount of money being spent and this whole this generational reboot that's happening at Chelsea. For the amount of money that's being spent,
yes,
there should be pressure on them to be title contenders. That doesn't mean that they're not going to have their hiccups. That doesn't mean that they're going to win the Premier League trophy. But this is an extraordinary amount of money.
Yeah.
And listen, it almost feels like we're so desensitized to how much money's being spent currently in the world of football, because it is a nuclear arms race, especially with the addition of Saudi Arabian money coming into the footballing landscape, that we're almost downplaying what these expectations, because I'm old enough to remember before everything went down with Chelsea being forced to find a new owner and all of this stuff, every single year we were basically shaming the clubs that spent over £100 million on a player, shaming a club that's, oh my God, look, in the last 2 transfer windows, you've spent £400 million.
Yes.
How are you not a Premier League title contender? Everybody was doing that. So why are we doing the same with Chelsea?
They're still right, aren't they? I mean, Chelsea are getting shamed. I mean, they are getting shamed massively, and I'm about to do a bit of shaming.
No, it's just when they play. I mean,
but you thought they were going to win the league, and that's fine. But we all remember it. It's available. Go back on last week's show. I mean, that was a great Billy backtrack from our pal Danny there. But we all saw it. We were all there.
See what you did. Yeah, see what you did.
I mean, look, I want to talk about Chelsea a little bit, because as I mentioned, I've been to their first 2 games of the season. And on the first game, I was in Diamond Hospitality, as I mentioned to you last week. And so I'm with a few celebrities and a few people that... Yeah, I had about 9 champagnes. It was excellent. But there was people there who were kind of day trippers and celebrities and kind of, the wives of people who were interested and the husbands of wives who were interested, whatever, but they were all kind of very rich people. And when Enzo Fernandez was doing things against Chelsea, which was quite literally like control, move it out of a tight space and pass it right, they were going like, oh my days, that's amazing. No, you've seen this guy, he's sick, no.
It's pretty good impression.
Yeah, it was accurate is what it was. Sorry, Tim. And I was sitting there with a friend of mine, and we're kind of football anorak types, and we were just sort of looking at him going like, yeah, I mean, it was good, but I don't want to sound like Roy Keane here, but that is his job, is to control the ball in a tight circumstance in central midfield and find a release pass. Now, I'm not criticizing that in terms of it being a good thing to do. He played well in that game, but it wasn't spectacular. It wasn't worth an oh my days, and it certainly isn't worth £100 million. Now, I get your point completely on the inflation of the market, and value doesn't mean anything now, and you're absolutely right. But still, it's £100 million spent by Chelsea in this $1 billion revival they're doing. And Enzo Fernandez is not worth £100 million, even in this market. No way. Very good player, but in a sense, he's just Jorginho. Very good side to side, very comfortable on the ball. Is it a monumental upgrade from Jorginho? It is not, to the point where at least Jorginho could take a penalty, right? Penalty was appalling this weekend. And there's all this flash about Chelsea at the moment, all this money, but there's no value. And Enzo Fernandez is an embodiment of that. And people have been drawn in by the celebrity name and drawn in by the World Cup and drawn in by the fact he is talented. But is he the right player for this team at this time? And there's no evidence to support the fact he is. You put Caicedo into this mix, who had a stinker of a debut. I mean, here's a few stats for you from Caicedo. 37 minutes played, 8 times he lost the ball, committed 2 fouls, had 1 shot wildly off target, 1 error leading to a shot, and 1 penalty conceded. A truly abysmal debut. When he came on, he made Thomas Soucek look really good. That's
now
how
do
appalling.
Now do Modric.
I'm getting there, right? But do you see what the thing is about the value and the money for Chelsea is that there's a reason why people spend all their money on the attack.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not that defenders aren't important. And it's not that midfielders aren't important. It's that if you haven't got a goal scorer, you ain't going to win games of football. It's the hardest thing to do in the game is to put the ball in the net. And they have not spent all the money on trying to buy someone who's going to make them different, right? There's a lot of competent players they could have in certain positions, but it's being able to score, which is going to be your differential. And they've spent all their money on who the hell is Disasi? Why have they bought Gusto? What's going on with both Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez coming in the same little run of buying players? And let me just
around the corner.
Let me just talk about Mudryk for a second. Now, I don't want to go too harsh like I would in our private text about Mykhailo Mudryk because I don't want to get sued. But if that's a footballer, I'm a fried egg. Right? This guy, £88 million. One angle to look at this, and it's the only one I'll do here because, again, I don't want to get sued, is that there's no way due diligence was done to sanction an £88 million signing of Mykhailo Mudryk. Now, we can talk about him being totally lacking in confidence. That's absolutely fine. He clearly is. But apart from pace, there's nothing. There's nothing there. There is nothing there to justify bringing this player in a position they already had players to play in. And there was a cross at one point. West Ham had this really brilliant mid-block going on. You ain't going to get through the middle of West Ham. They want you to cross the ball because it's landed the Giants. Will clear it away. Eventually, Raheem Sterling gets around the outside. He was very good, by the way, on the day. Crosses to Mudryk on the other side. It's a free volley on the far side. And his ankle just went to full flop. It went to ice cream sitting out in the sun. And it was just technically poor. And I don't expect someone of that money to be technically poor. There's no way he's worth that money. And he could almost get away with it if he didn't look like someone who's so full of themselves. Like that, the talent ain't enough tattoo with that out of it and all the glam and flash of his whole persona. If you're going to be like that, try not to be shit. Sorry, Tim. And he is just really, really bad. And, you know, the essence of it is who researched him, who signed him, what does he want to be, how is he going to play, how do you give him confidence? If you don't give him confidence, how are you going to sell him? They'll never make their money back on it. And he's just an embodiment of, I'm sure he's a lovely guy, right? And I'm sure if he went to the Championship, the level that he belongs at, he would rip it up for Leeds United this year in the Championship. I'm sure of it. But he ain't a Premier League player, and he certainly ain't a Chelsea player. And yet all this pressure has been thrown on him because Egbali went in his private jet to get him before Arsenal could get him, who then bought Trossard, who's a significantly better footballer for half the money. And you're just watching him, and you almost feel sorry for him, Dunny, because it just is an embodiment here of this throwing spaghetti at the wall transfer policy that, at the moment, literally nothing is sticking. And what do you do with Mudryk now?
Well, and here's... You asked where the recruitment comes into play, and it almost feels like somebody stumbled upon Instagram and realized that he was posting about watching Arsenal play, and then all of a sudden he got poached out from underneath Arsenal's nose, and the money, and all of a sudden, you know, you could see how this happened. Happens all the time. Much more public though, that felt. Watching him with Shakhtar Donetsk, you could tell he was a good player. He had something different. He was probably at the top of what that level was at the time. And going back and watching some of the highlights and watching some of the games, you could see he had something. He still has something. You can tell every single game he gets himself into great positions. But ultimately, like and this is a conversation we've had about a lot of wingers in the Premier League. How are you like a Sadio Mane or a Mo Salah, where the consistency of goals and assists are there every single match day versus those guys, the rest that can get in those positions, but they don't have that final quality. They can't slow it down. They can't pick their corners, can't pick their spots. So there's a significant difference. I mean, like For example, Ben Rama, right? You loathe him and you love him, depending on if he hits the back of the net. But he, every single game, puts himself in great goal scoring positions, finds himself in situations where he can score goals. And it's just kind of a roll of the dice, whether he's going to find the back of the net or not.
Yeah.
The thing about Mudryk is he's one of many in the position that finds themselves struggling at Chelsea. And especially in this theoretical wide attacking player, whether it's on the left or the right, think about the laundry list of players that have gone through Chelsea Football Club over the last 5 years that have come from RB Leipzig, have come from Bayer Leverkusen, have come from Borussia Dortmund, have come from Shakhtar Donetsk, have come from Ajax, have come through the Chelsea system, have come from Man City. And guys that you're like, oh, this guy's going to fit perfectly in Chelsea. All of a sudden, they end up flaring out, they end up leaving, or they end up rotting on the bench waiting for an opportunity to come in and maybe get an opportunity to prove themselves that they are worthy. But it's the same challenge. It doesn't matter what your nationality is. When you're in the Premier League, it is about goals and assists. It's not, and maybe secondary assists. Let's count the pass before the pass, right?
Yeah, let's not count that.
Well, the pass before the hockey assist, since you love me saying it.
They've been calling it the pre-assist, which is
pre-assist,
so it makes my toes curl, like when people say the word
pre-assist,
moist.
the hocky assist, the pass.
You had your pre-assist. Oh, Mazel tov.
Ready for my workout, Jim. This is a challenge though, and for Mudryk, I mean, I don't know, man. Like what I think happens is you have guys that can't get out of their funk. And the only way they get out of their funk is leaving for the international break. Yeah. And when you get away for the international break and you're around your friends and guys you consider your family and you're speaking your language and you're eating culturally your food and you're kind of in that natural habitat where you feel much more comfortable, I think that's where you see guys thrive. Now, the challenge for all these guys is coming back and replicating those performances while away on international duty to then prove to Mauricio Pochettino that they deserve to play.
Final question to you on this and final point on this, and I want to move on to some other bits that hopefully you'll find just as annoying. Question:
Why does Ben Chilwell want to fight everybody or act like he's going to fight everybody every single time he's on the field?
Not that, but that's interesting. And we might do that another time when someone fights him back. Christian Pulisic scored an incredible goal on debut for Milan against Bologna on Monday night, I think. First game of the season out in Serie A. And the reason I highlight that is not just because it puts a smile on your little face, but also if you think about Raheem Sterling, Mykhailo Mudryk, Noni Madueke, Nicholas Jackson, and Nkunku injured, Lukaku still on the payroll, and Breuer apparently fancied by Pochettino. I was in the press conference post-match, and there were questions, obviously, about transfers. And he kind of made the point that we're trying to find the right profile. We're still in the process of trying to bring people into attacking areas. And I've read that short list to you there of the ones that are there. That's not even the ones that have left the club and have, joined and left. And it's inexplicable to me, Danny, that it feels at the moment like Chelsea is where careers go to die in the same way Man United 2 years ago was where careers went to die for different reasons. At Man United, they were trying to get to a standard that they simply couldn't get to, but they were being held to that Roy Keane level when they're not Roy Keane, and Man United aren't the biggest fish in the pond anymore. And we don't want to get into that today, but that was broadly what was happening, and that's why there was so much grief for your Fellaini's and Fred types. This is such a different thing, and I'd love your view on it, because these are all talented players, as Christian Pulisic showed us a couple of days ago, yesterday as we record this, in fact. There's an incredible amount of talent there, but he would sort of do something great. The Liverpool game stands out. We recorded a program that night. I said how good he was. And then he disappeared again, be it injuries, be it form, whatever. Mason Mount has gone from the go-to guy to sold. Yeah. And, Raheem Sterling has gone from someone that people used to legitimately talk about in the same conversation as, well, there's Ronaldo and Messi, and then there's the best player in the world that's not superhuman. And people used to say it was Sterling. And I'd happily have that conversation with somebody because he was so good for so long. And yet he goes to Chelsea, and though good the weekend, you're like, well, who is he anymore? I mean, why do you think that keeps on happening to players, and how do you make it stop?
Well, I think it first and foremost has to do with a decision, a collective decision making group that represents the club that can identify who they want to be through a manager. And historically, I think one of the challenges away from the glitz and the glam, because they have won trophies and then yet failed miserably, sometimes step and lock within a year or two of each other. They've moved on so quickly. And the expectations of what a manager can or cannot do um, was so high and so elite, and maybe to an extent so arrogant that all of a sudden, when the failure did start to happen, it wasn't just a festering failure that something you could overcome. We look at Arsenal, and how many times a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we were saying, oh, maybe Arteta's not going to last, until he had a guy like Edu alongside of him being able to put together what the team needed to look like in his identification of how he wanted his football to be played. That is going to be the challenge for Pochettino. But the problem is, with the amount of money being spent and the historical success that Chelsea has had more recently, you are unfortunately at the mercy of such high expectations that all of a sudden you can have an off year, but you can't have 2 off years. And how do we find, I guess, the correct terminology or the correct language to navigate what the challenge currently is for Mauricio Pochettino, and how he needs time to better get to know his players, the players better get to know him and his coaching staff, and then collectively look at a maturity level that isn't just off the field, but more importantly on the field in terms of performance. Because right now, when you have this much addition in terms of young, dynamic, new players, there's still an element of being untrustworthy.
Yeah.
But they're still going to have significant growing pains and learning curves. And I think we've seen this in the first 2 games. You can see the potential. The potential is absolutely there when they're on the field. And at the same time, really naive moments where they end up duly punished or unable to capitalize the mistake of the opponent. So I think Pochettino's the right guy. But again, how many voices? As I'm moving my fingers, like talking hands, like how many voices are at the club? Because this was a challenge that I said to you when Bowley took over. You can change everything behind the scenes. You can change the entire medical staff. You can change the strength and conditioning coach staff. You can change the entire group of players. You can make it your club. But at some point, you have to allow the manager to be the man and to be the guy that has the voice that says, no, if you believe in me, which is why I think it took so long to get the Pochettino deal done in the first place. If you're going to believe in me, then I have to have a say. I have to be able to say no. I have to be able to say, I need this player, and you have to be able to go get him for me. So that's what I'm intrigued to see, because this could be something where Chelsea could fail miserably again this year, or they could have a tremendous amount of success because of the amount of time that the manager is going to have on the training field, because they are not going to have the distraction, unfortunately, of Champions League or Europa League or even Conference League, which people
eventually you feel it's got to come good for Chelsea. And I think they probably are a striker short and a few weeks short. And I mentioned after Liverpool, I think come back to them after 12, 15 games and we can make an assessment. But for now, they lost to West Ham, and that was funny.
Where's Lukaku, by the way?
Do you know what? We got no time. I don't know. It's the answer, but they don't want him, apparently.
Nobody's talking about that.
He's still an employee. So
100 million, right?
We'll see if he comes back, but no one else wants him. No one else can afford him. I want to talk to you about yellow cards because we've had these kind of rule sort of changes this year, right? So they're going to give yellow cards for more stuff. So I won't go through the full list, but it's an automatic yellow when more than one player approaches the referee, which wasn't exactly done at Selhurst Park on Monday, whatever. Automatic yellow when a player runs from distance at the referee. Automatic yellow for time wasting, yada, yada, yada. Automatic yellow for over celebration. There's a huge list. So all these little time wasting bits that slow the clock. You're meant to get time wasted a yellow card for, though. I think they are trying to do it for every occasion, but there's clearly moments they are missing, and that is frustrating because they said one player gets it, one doesn't, whatever. Now, this weekend, there were 3 reds, which were the second yellow, which was Tim Ream, Fulham, Brentford. There was Naya Faguer, which was, there's no argument here. It was 2 straight yellows, and the second yellow was moronic. And there was Takehiro Tomiyasu on Monday night for Arsenal against Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
I just found this stat quite interesting going into the weekend. Guess how many red cards in total there were in the Premier League last season? Have a guess.
So maybe like somewhere around 45?
Yellow cards in the Premier League last season.
Oh, I thought you said red cards.
Sorry, forgive me. Red cards. I did say red cards. I said it wrong the second time, but we won't edit it out because we're on this podcast. Guess how many red cards there were? 17.
Oh, okay. So I was way off.
17 red cards. I was stunned by this. This is from Dow Johnson's ESPN column, right? 17 red cards in the Premier League last season. Now, for reference, guess how many there were in La Liga?
Oh, I'd say 45.
89.
89. Wow.
Including just 15 for Real Betis.
Yeah.
Which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
65 in Liga, 41 Serie A, 20 in the Bundesliga to 17 in the Premier League, which is incredible to me. So it is a particularly lenient league, but that may well change with this sort of yellow card thing. We've spoken before about the high bar and trying to let the game flow, and we talk about the difference between the Premier League and these other leagues.
Mac Allister red.
That is part of this, but that wasn't too yellow, so we may well touch on that. But the two yellows thing, the argument is if you start giving yellows for offences and stop being so lenient, the offences will stop. So far, that has not been borne out, certainly by this weekend, but I would hope they'll stick to it for at least a few weeks to find out if that does change player behaviour. So, for example, the Tomiyasu one, he was yellow carded the first time for holding the ball too long in the referee's mind for a throw-in, though he held it for 8 seconds and Kai Havertz had it for 15 seconds, which led to the 23 seconds, which the referee was like, hey, that's far too long. Tomiyasu got the yellow. One of Tim Ream's bookings were for having a go at the referee, which you're not supposed to do. I mean, my question to you, Danny, is if we end up getting a La Liga level of red cards in the Premier League because of two yellows, is that going to change behaviour at all? And what do you make to the more yellows, almost like the broken windows theory of refereeing?
Yeah. So let me be clear. I think far too often the verbal abuse that referees get, not only from players, but from managers and from the benches, needs to be clamped down on. It's far too much. I always tell the story. I've had multiple conversations with referees that always say, if you just cover your face with your hand, you just be like, you are having a fucking shocker right now. Sorry, Tim. You'll get away with it. There's much more leniency because you're not demonstrative. But if you come flying at me and throwing your hands around or, swinging, bouncing the ball, all that stuff, I'm going to show you yellow. I'm totally in agreement with all that because I think what referees, for the most part, I think almost all of the referees understand that the level of intensity for athletes is really hard to control sometimes. And that's not an excuse. It's just a reality because the competitive nature of going at it during a game, especially at a level like that, you have to have a killer mentality. You have to eat. You have to win. You have to leave it all on the line. It's me versus you. And that gets ramped up where red mist, blood red, whatever you want to call it, you find yourself walking into that territory every once in a while. But there also has to be the moment where you do need to show respect. And for me, slamming the ball on the ground, kicking the ball away, swinging your arms at the referee, all of that stuff, even the dismissive, turning your back on the referee after a foul is called against you and just flinging your arm back. Like those are things where I think it's more demonstrative, where you're showing a disrespect with your body language, not necessarily with the verbals that you're expressing at the referee. The time wasting thing, I've been going back and forth on this. In my mind, I've been listening to all the different, talking heads and big swingers in the world of punditry that are talking about this. From a player's perspective, adding all of this extra time is going to be detrimental in the long run for the physical health of the players. But this idea of quote unquote time wasting, it's such a gray area. And I think you're going to find yourself, Howard Webb and everyone's going to find themselves in a bit of trouble because not every referee manages the game the same way. If the ball's on the ground and you kick it away, or you throw it over the guy's head and make him go turn around and get it. Those are all things I understand. But like when you're sitting there and you're like waiting for a throw, and I've been in this situation as an outside back, you're waiting for movement, you're waiting for a guy to check, you're waiting like 3 to 4 seconds is expected. 5 to 8 seconds, that's a good amount of time in that window to figure out how to throw the ball in. But if you're just blatantly like, okay, catch your breath, we all know how to manipulate the clock. We all understand how to. So that type of time wasting, I just think you start walking into this really interesting debate of, is it really time wasting? Is it really having an effect on the game? Like, I know we all want the ball to be moving and we want chances on the offensive end to play, scoring goals, all that stuff. But I just think there needs to be kind of certain layers. And the layers of like throwing the ball away, kicking the ball away, throwing it over a player's head, making him go chase it, all of those things are maybe different than like a guy with the ball over his head and he's kind of waiting for a movement, waiting for a throw. Because, if the game's in the 54th minute, I mean, really? Like that's my problem. With like goalkeepers, like really you're going to show a yellow card then versus like if it's like the 43rd minute in the first half, or if it's like in the 87th minute and you're managing a lead.
But if they've got a yellow, what are they going to do next time? They'll run behind, they'll get the ball, they'll kick it out because then the referee ain't going to take it. It goes to the Rodri foul conversation, right?
Yeah.
Which they're not doing. But if they book Rodri for every time he'd done the Rodri foul, if every counter-attack foul that they did as that's a clever foul and they got a straight yellow for it every single time, then the player then doesn't do it the next time. On a yellow, they don't do it and the game will flow because they can't commit that foul, which essentially is against the laws of the game. You're not meant to foul someone because they go past you. You should be punished.
Yeah. Again,
I think red cards should become more commonplace. I don't think that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. If you want to stop him going through, that's your risk. It shouldn't be a risk-free thing to stop a counterattack, should it?
Listen, I theoretically agree with you, but I'm trying to think like in the course of an argument, I agree with what you're saying. But if I'm a player and I'm managing the game, there's moments where, yes, I have to sacrifice. I have to sacrifice myself for the betterment of the team. I have to manage the game. I have to think about, is this a realistic goal scoring opportunity, or am I just being a malicious right now? Sorry, Tim. Like, am I trying to get a piece out of him just to get a piece out of him? Because there's all these different things, payback and chirping and talking, and all these things come into moments where you leave a little bit in, or you tug a little bit harder. You do. There's the game within the game. So I get what you're saying, but in those moments, there's different ways, and we can call it maliciousness. We can call it dark arts. We can talk clever. We can do all these things to describe it, but it's just in the moment you're trying not to lose, and you're trying to make sure that you win, and like you're trying to maintain the result. So I just don't think it's as black and white as everybody wants it to be. I can understand this idea of keeping the game flowing, keeping the game going, but I wonder where the conversation, the narrative would be or is going to be if Premier League changes from 17 red cards last year to 89 red cards this year.
Let me ask you this question on that, because I think it's really interesting. Do you think if you got a yellow card for every foul, right? If every single foul you did was a yellow card, meaning we did get to that number of red cards, because of course you do, would there be less fouls, or would the red cards go through the roof? Do you think there's a possibility if every foul you did, you got a yellow, those players stop doing fouls?
No, I don't, because you're changing the sport dramatically. I mean, then it's just non-contact. I mean, you might as well just put a net in between both sides, right at the midfield stripe, and just see if you can kick it far enough to score a goal on the opponent.
But it's meant to be non-foul. A foul is illegal and against the laws of the game.
But there's the physicality of challenging for a ball, because the ball is not on the person. You're not tackling the person. The ball is in between the people constantly. It's in the air. It's on the ground. It's dribbling. It's all of that. The ball's running into space. You're trying to get there first. You're trying to maintain possession. You're bodying off. You're creating the space away from the opponent. I just think you're dramatically changing what the game would be. And I think you would ruin the game if you try to say at some point that every foul is a yellow card. You're just not going to end up with anywhere close to 11 players on each side. But
if every time a player who was on the break was fouled by a Man City player, that Man City player got a yellow card, then maybe more teams would score against Man City and would score against Guardiola teams across the last decade, because every time someone tried to counter them, they didn't hack them down or pull their shirts or stop them from going forward. And maybe Man City won't win the league by 10 points every year, because that little hole that they have discovered, they continue to take advantage of, even from the Fernandinho days, early Fernandinho, never mind later Fernandinho and now into Rodri, it would be a fundamentally different game. But does that make it a worse game that they stop exploiting that loophole?
Well, I think that everybody understands. Like, there's not a referee that does a Man City game that doesn't understand what Fabinho, that Fernandinho or Rodri are trying to do in terms of quote unquote the professional foul, the tactical foul, right?
No. But they let them get away with it. They know it,
because we minimize it, right? We minimize it. We say it's not really a transition opportunity. It's more of like a methodical buildup. But even though there's momentum on the side of the attacking team, they know how to close down space, commit the foul, reset, get everybody back. I think every referee understands that and recognizes that, but very few referees are willing to make that call.
Listen, we've got to move on because we're nearly out of time. It looks like it is going to be a full decision show, I'm afraid, but we have to do it because there's been some really interesting things that are worth our time. Alexis Mac Allister was sent off this weekend for a challenge that in most European leagues, I think would be a red card. And we mentioned some of the numbers earlier on. I think there was a debate to be had about whenever you go into a tackle now, if the toe is up and the studs are showing, is it a red? It was given as a red. It wasn't overturned at the time, but it has since been overturned. So Mac Allister will not serve a suspension for that red card. It's essentially been overturned for the foul or not foul on Ryan Christie. Maybe it should have been a yellow. Maybe it should have been nothing. He won't need to serve a suspension for it. Last week, we had the apology to Gary O'Neill. This week, we've got a red card being overturned. If you could overturn a second yellow, I wonder if there might be a conversation about Tomiyasu essentially being completely manipulated by the dive of Jordan Ayew, having not touched him at all for that second yellow. But for some reason, we don't look at second yellows because don't know. What do you think to that? Overturned Mac Allister. I'm quite surprised, actually.
Well, again, I'm a Manchester United homer, so I thought Pedro Porro's challenge on Bruno was the exact same challenge, if not worse, because there was more force in the challenge from Porro on Bruno. And that's why, Bruno Fernandes came out publicly afterwards asking for an apology or wondering out loud if he was going to get an apology. Because all of a sudden, when you apologize once, every team that felt like they were screwed is going to be expecting a public apology or expecting an apology to the manager, which the manager can then publicize and maybe politicize, as we saw from match day one. For me, we got on the WhatsApp. I sent that WhatsApp immediately. There's no chance that's a red card.
No.
Now I understand when the studs are showing, you have, and I've always say this, the moment that your studs are off the ground and they are showing in any way, shape, or form, tilted, they're up, you have allowed the referee to make a decision. I stand by that. I will continue to stand by that. If your bottom of your studs are showing, you have allowed the referee to make a decision. If you keep your foot tucked and down, toes pointed down, then now we're talking about force. We're talking about endangering the safety of the opponent. Mac Allister, that for me was one of the softest red cards I'd seen in a while, because he quote unquote caught him, but there's this is where I get nervous about real time decisions added with, is it a clear and obvious mistake added with instant replay, super slow-mo, because you can justify anything either way. For that red card, you could then say, well, there's not a clear and obvious mistake made by the referee. So as VAR, I am not going to instruct the referee to go see the monitor. No problem. I could also see if there was no call on the challenge, VAR saying, hold on a second, because studs are showing, I'm going to suggest violent conduct. There's force, or even though there's not force, he's endangering the safety of the opponent. And then I could see no call, plays on, pick him up, dust his butt off, and then everybody moves on. So I think 3 versions of the same challenge could have been realistic had the referee and or VAR decided to look at it differently. I just don't see any force. I see two players at maximum speed with a ball bouncing going in opposite direction. I never saw him push through. I'm not a Liverpool guy. I'm not a Mac Allister guy. I just didn't think that was a red, because these type of challenges we see every single game. And if that's the bar, this is why I'm glad it's overturned. Because if that's the bar, I think that's a danger. And again, listen, there's going to be someone listening saying, hold on a second. You got to be in control of your own body. You got to be responsible for your actions. Shut up. I ain't got time for that. That's just a soft challenge. That's a challenge that happens each and every single game. So I'm glad it was overturned.
Overturned quite rightly, and that's probably a good thing, though frustrating, I'm sure, on the day. Game's gone soft. One final kind of pair of decisions I did just want to bring up briefly. Man United, Tottenham, handball, Romero. I mean, I still don't get it.
Handball.
I still don't get it. I mean, you talk about, did the player make himself unnaturally bigger? Yeah. Was the arm in an unexpected position? Yeah. Was it, and apparently it wasn't given because of the proximity. I don't buy that argument either. Like I've seen penalties given. There was a famous Pogba one. I was at one last year with West Ham against Bournemouth. I think it was Jadon Anthony went to ground and it was on the end line. He put his arm in the air because it was a kind of natural thing to do. Antonio chipped it against his arm and it was a penalty because his arm wasn't expected to be there. Romero goes over, makes himself bigger, arms up in the air, hits the red zone. It's a clear handball. It's not given. It's not reviewed. Michael Oliver was the referee, which is troubling. But the reason I highlight it is just because that was wrong. And one of the many things that Bruno Fernandes was kind of whinging about after the game. But also in the World Cup final on Sunday, the penalty that was given to Spain, Kira Walsh's arm is sort of like down by her side, and she's clearly trying to grab the waist of the Spain player driving through. She does grab the waist of the Spain player driving through, and the ball hits her hand. Now, it's given as a penalty. The referee didn't have a Scooby what to do. She's looking at it, and eventually she has to make a decision because we'd all waited like 7 minutes. It was 13 minutes added on because of that, and Greenwood got injured. But you're sort of watching, and you think, in the same 24-hour space, following the same laws, one save isn't given, one obvious accidental handball where I think our arm is in an expected position is given. And I just, I just don't know. Yeah. I don't get it, Danny, how that one at Tottenham wasn't given and that one was.
First off, it didn't come home is what you're saying? Didn't come home? We made it through 55 minutes. Wasn't the king going to do something? Weren't you guys going to be open the double-decker buses and like?
You've been out of the tournament so long at this point. You've since sacked your manager.
Deflection.
No, okay.
Horsey.
No, I'll answer it. Okay. I'll answer it. I think that the women's football team, the Lionesses, were fucking terrible in that final. And someone had to go at me on whatever Twitter's called now. It was like, oh, here come the misogynists saying how bad England were. And I was like, well, actually, it isn't. Because if I was being misogynistic, I'd be like, oh, well done, girls. You made the final. So proud of you. It's great they made the final and all that. But also, you don't take off the striker and the second top scorer in the WSL in Rachel Daly. For some reason, they play her at wing back, which I don't understand, at half time, and then stick Steve Bruce up front in Millie Bright to start knocking the ball down against a better football team. Serena Wigman, she might be the new Gareth Southgate. She should be like considering a position. They were so bad in that final. So let's not go like, it was great they made the final.
Horsey.
They were utterly outplayed. You can have her.
We'll take her.
We'll get Vlatko in. Because if the tactics in the final is, stick the big one up front, and pump it up there, I thought England was shocking in that final. Absolutely shocking. So there you go. Great they made it, but still done better than you.
Hey, really, really quick, back to Romero.
Yes.
Like, how did he clear concussion protocol, by the way? He comes off on Sunday and he's available on Saturday? Yeah.
I don't know.
I thought it was 7 day.
I said on Friday's show he's going to be missing. So when he lined up, I had no idea. He must have. Maybe he does that thing that you meant to do when you're
Hopefully he's okay.
Well, he must be okay, right? He must have passed. He must have passed the test. Done that thing where he touched his nose and done the alphabet.
But by the way, back to United. If you don't finish Marcus Rashford's header, you don't finish Bruno Fernandes' header. I mean, they were wiping the floor with Tottenham in that first 45 minutes. You don't put those two goals in the back of the net. He left it open. So I don't have a problem with the referee, the penalty call, all that stuff. For me, Rashford, Bruno Fernandes, you score those two goals. It's a completely different conversation. There's no excuses. We're not talking about VAR. We're not talking about a referee.
Yeah, same old problems with Man United this weekend. And It's funny, isn't it? Right. That's it for this week's Week in the Tackle. We'll have another program for you next week. If you subscribe to the program as a podcast, you can watch it in full on YouTube. If you watch this on YouTube, hello. You can also subscribe as a podcast and do so because that's terrific for our numbers. That is Brian Dunseth. I'm Tom Money. Tim Horsey produced the program. I'll be back next week.